How to paint realistic eyes in watercolour. That's what this video is all about. So let's make a start and let's get them brushes wet. Now, painting that pupil. The pupil is so important, of course it is, because that's going to really add that life to the painting. Now when you paint a pupil, you have to consider the placement within the eye. As I said earlier on, is it in the middle? Is it slightly off centre? Is it up, down, to the left, to the right? You have to check that out first of all. You can do that by measuring that with a pencil or a ruler or something like that compared to the reference photograph, okay? But in the case of this red kite, I've also got to consider the shape of this pupil. Is it round? Is it oval? Is it oblong? What shape is it? So look at that as well, because not all pupils are completely round. They're not. And also some of the pupil could be disguised, it could be covered up by reflections. This one is partially, a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm thinking about making the pupils smaller to begin with, and then I know I've got room to manoeuvre them because I can gradually start making it wider, making it bigger, to the right size it should be. And carefully at the photograph, as I say, just to make sure that it's not too big or too small, it's in the right place. Work out gradually to get it right, and that's about it there. I do find that some pupils are not really sharp around the edge, so not really crisp. So what do you want to do? Just lightly soften that very edge down with a damp, clean brush. I just want to diffuse that edge a little bit. Just diffuse that, because it's a little bit too sharp. Okay, something like that. I see how that's just kind of breaking it down just a fraction. That's all it's doing, look. That's got it, that's got it, that's got it. Now let's head back to the cheetah a minute. I want to show you how you can make the eye kind of sit within its socket. Because obviously just having the eye on its own looks like it's floating on the face at the moment. So we need to make sure it sits within that face. Now the first thing we need to do with this is paint around the edge of the eye and also the eyelids as well. Adding this darker area in will really help the eye recess. So I think what I'm going to do, just paint in the lowest part to begin with, which I think goes down around there. I can just see my pencil marks standing out. Sketch it in first of all. That sort of curves around here. It's a matter of working things out as you go along. Put some reference marks in like I'm doing now. And then you can start to fill those areas in once you're confident that's where you need to go. Now because we spent time mapping this out to begin with, we've got our pencil marks on there ready and waiting for us, haven't we? They're still there, so we need to start painting the lines that we need. So in this case with the bottom eyelid, what I'm doing here is drawing the outside edge of the lines to begin with. Then I'll fill those in. I'm going to fill these areas in, but very, very carefully. You've also got to consider how thick the lines are as well. These are fairly thin, aren't they? But in some places they're actually quite wide, quite thick in there. Now checking the left hand side of the eye socket, you can see it's actually quite deep in there, isn't it? So that's going to really kind of recess back quite some way. So it has to be very, very dark in there. And if I do put too much black in there, it's not a problem because I can always lift paint off once it's dried. I'll let it dry first. Because lifting off paint will give you extra highlights as well. Have you noticed that when you start looking into an eye, be it, well, most animals really, sometimes you come across red. I know. But because you've got red in there, we need to introduce that colour in. Not too much of it. We don't want it looking a little bit bloodshot, do we? But this is going to be behind the scenes. And that red will get toned down over time. Now I like to use a damp, clean brush. This is my size 00. It's just lightly dampened. By using it that way around, I can just start to go over some of these areas now. Just blend them slightly, just a little bit. Just literally just a damp brush. And by doing that, it'll help it sort of marry together, which will then give you the impression of shape within that lower eyelid. Pull out a few hairlines as well, which I very often do while the paint is still wet. At least then you can drag some of that paint straight onto the face. Now if you want to have a go at painting this lovely cheetah, I've got this and over 150 other video tutorials for you to watch on my Patreon channel. I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll pop a little link to the top right hand corner of the screen for you, okay? Now, highlights. Pardon? The highlight within the eye, but I've really got to consider the consistency of the paint which I'm using for this highlight. I don't want it too thick. I want the white of the paper to show through that little bit as well. Remember, these are transparent colours after all, aren't they? So what I'm going to show you on this part is how to get the background colours of foundation washes again if you wish. We can build on top of this as we go along as well, we really can. So I'm going to get the lightest colour down first of all, and with this dog's eye, you can see on the left hand, probably from the middle to the left hand side of the highlight, there's quite a lot of blue there, isn't there? Now this is just fading out here to the white of the paper, nearly to the white of the paper. So I'm going to move that around, just a small amount there, just soften this edge here a lot. Drop a little more blue just in there, it's going to tint it, something like that. It just lifts a little bit off with a damp clean brush. Just add that bit of a highlight in there. If you want to, you can go over the top again just by tapping it. See how intense that is, look? Just by a light tap. And you can add a few odd ones here and there. Same colour, same mix, same consistency. You can get the words out then. I think that's about roughly how it should be. I just fine tune that edge out a little bit more. That does come down the edge a bit there as well, doesn't it? So just down to here. Okay, looks a bit odd, I know. But trust me, it's going to work. It will work. I'm going to get just a small amount of phthalo blue. Now, phthalo blue is quite a rich colour, so be careful with that. So this is quite watery to begin with. I don't want to go too dark to begin with on this. So phthalo blue, let's just pop this in to begin with just around there. And there's a little bit just kind of peeking around this corner here as well, overlapping that brown. Now I'm going to intensify that a little bit more, so just get some more of a milky consistency phthalo blue, and we'll pop that in around there. Look at the difference, look. So I mean, it's very, very strong, it really is. And then we can very lightly soften down the edge of this, just like we did around this edge here. And this will all act behind the scenes. We'll need to kind of set the stage really. Think about what's going on behind the scenes, in the background, when we add anything over the top. Now let's talk a little bit about the reflections within the eye. In this case, I'm trying to think what it is actually. It's probably, could be an embankment. There's obviously trees there. So I've got to paint these trees in. And I do try to copy the reference photograph quite close. Now think about the curvature and the angles of those lines, and practice by moving your hand away from the paper, first of all, to get a feel of the way that line goes. Right, let's have a quick look in there now and see what we can see. First thing I want to do is look at the main shape. That's what I'm going to do actually. I'm just going to water this down a little bit in one corner. I don't want this too thick, this dark colour. Just add a little bit of water to the side of my mixing bowl there. Just so I can just water this down a fraction. And you've got a section here which comes across, right, for these reflections. This is probably a window order for some form, isn't it? Got one just coming across there, and then a section around here as well. I think there might be a little bit of brown in that. So I'm just going to paint the outline first of all, and I might try and just merging that in just with a damp clean brush initially, and see how well it goes in. This, I'm not sure what that is. It could be a tree. So it's quite amazing really when you start looking deep into animals' eyes, be it a cat, a dog, horse, whatever it might be. You very often see things in there. I mean, I saw myself in one once, honestly. And I painted myself without realising I painted my silhouette. Because I took a photograph of a dog, and let's just say that I was in its eyes. Look at those finer details as well. So even though I do say to you, make sure that your reference photograph is of a similar size to your painting, occasionally I'll zoom in. I'll pinch into that reference photograph on a tablet or an iPad or whatever I'm using, and look at them finer details. Just give me some idea really on how it all goes together, how it all joins together. That comes up to there, and then you've got all these lines going down and around and over the top. I think this is probably just the kind of eyelashes, the hairs from the top of the eyelid, kind of branching down. These are the reflections from that. So probably a little bit more brown in there. A little bit burnt sienna as well, why not? Change the colour, change the flavour. Now it's time to finally put a bit of a sparkle on this eye. Here we go. Now watercolour white, that's what I tend to use on a regular basis for my highlights. I find it easy to use, easy to blend, and also easy to lift off as well. You can, if you wish, use a little bit of white gouache instead, because gouache is naturally opaque anyway, and that would be ideal for adding highlights onto the paper. Now my white is fairly creamy to begin with, and you want to try and maintain a creamy consistency. Now when I load a brush, I want to make sure that when I do paint with this white, it's going to flow. But I don't want it fading as it dries, because it will. If it's too watery, it could just fade down a little bit. It could kind of go a little bit grey. Now with this hare's eye, what I want to do is just put some basic markers in first of all. Sort of references really. And then I can start to build around those references. And even blend them as well. Because when you look at that reference photograph, you can see that the highlight is just above halfway of the eye. The centre of the pupil is about there, isn't it, where the highlight is, but it's quite faded down there to that blue area, isn't it? However, the left and right hand side of the highlight curves upwards, doesn't it? So it's got a bit more of a curve to it, and that will help create more shape within the eye. So what we need to do now is soften that down. So back to your double zero brush again. Now very lightly tickle over the top and soften it. The same with that. Don't blend it all the way. So where it's really light, obviously just soften it slightly. Just a little bit. Remember, we can always add more over the top, so it's not a problem. I'm going to just make sure this is nice and neat around the edge there. So soften that white there. And then this one here to soften down. Again, I think we probably need a little bit more in there. But I'd rather add not enough than too much, if you know what I mean, because it's very easy with watercolour white to get carried away with it. Now if you do like this video, remember to subscribe down below and also click on like as well. At least that way around you shouldn't miss one of my videos here on YouTube. You can see the difference this makes when you start to blend the white paint. So it really softens it down. In fact, to be honest with you, you can make it just about disappear if you're not careful. Once these are all nice and dry, you can do another thing. You can put another layer over the top. Make sure it's bone dry first though. And the second layer will again be creamy, but not so much blended this time around. This is where we add the really bright highlights in. You know, this is the exciting part. We've already got the lights, we've got the midtones, we've got the darks. This is where it really brings an eye together, or any animal in general which I'm painting. So you don't need a lot, do you? You can just see I'm just tapping this in places. And then on this tiny little bit there, look, it's little hints of reflection just showing through. The good thing about doing this when you're working in the painting is that you've got a bit of artistic license, haven't you? So if you want to change it slightly, yes you can do, of course you can. If you want to add a little bit more reflection in places, you can as well. See the outline of this person now there, look. Odd, isn't it? Very odd. I know that using white paint is quite controversial between different artists, I understand that. This is just the way that I tend to paint, the way that I prefer to paint. And to me there's no right or wrong way of doing it, there really isn't. We can see the overall effect that it creates. So it's entirely your choice if you decide to use white paint. Have you ever tried painting eyelashes or whiskers or anything like that? If not, let me just give you some ideas on how I do this. Don't overload that brush. So lovely creamy consistency, then start to paint those hairs. But I want some of these hairs to be really bright, and I want some just to be set back a little bit so they're not all the same tone. I don't want them all bright white, of course not. So what we can do, we can add a little bit more water to the white if we wanted to, and then make sure we can paint on some very pale versions of the hair. But also we can paint more of a mid-tone hair. And you can grab the purple and go over those lines just in one fell swoop so it doesn't blur. The white will blur otherwise, you know it will. But don't do them all though, just do a few here and there. You can always do more later on if you think you need to. Just knock some back as well. But there are some really white ones in there, aren't there? Which there are, some very, very white ones. Add some darker lines again for flicking up and around. I might have to turn this paper over when I do that, as I said, so just to kind of get those lines in. That's better though. I'm also checking out the direction of the hairs as well. So what you got to think about is the angles, the curves, the length of those lines, the thickness of those lines. And that'll bring the entire painting now together, won't it? A few more around there. Now this is really fast drying, this white paint. That's what I like about it, really. Very, very fast indeed. And because of that, I shouldn't have to hang on more than 10 seconds before I'm ready to put some colour over the top. So very, very handy. I think that will just about do, yeah, something like that. You can go over the same white line again once it's dry, all right, if you want to make it even brighter. Now, a little bit of colour. I think with that, all I'm going to do is get some burnt sienna, quite weak, so very watery, something like that. We'll add a bit of burnt sienna over the top, just to have a bit of a warmth within there as well. Probably even within the top of the eye. Well, the top of the eyelid as well there, look. Remember, once is all you want to go over that. And blend it together. There we go. Now we've got to think about those surrounding areas. Using small strikes, like small lines, look at the direction that the fur goes in on the top of the eye, and then start adding these little details around the eye itself. We've nearly done this already. I know. It seems quite a process, but you can see why I spend so long on painting an eye, because I want to make sure it's right. You know, because I tend to spend a lot of time looking at the eye whilst I'm painting, which I do, and it just gives you something to kind of focus on, which is why when I do a painting, something like this, if this was a full hair painting, I would paint the eyes first. But by building up these details, you can start to see the overall shape coming together. Look at that reference photograph, you see what I mean? There's a lot of light highlights around that eye, isn't there? We can fine tune and twiddle with this as much as we want to, we really can. And that's going to be pulling off a few little hairs for the eyelashes. Now you can either do it by lifting paint off. It depends as well whether your paint is staining. If it's a staining paint, you probably won't be able to lift much off. So bear that in mind. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to lift off just a few initially, and I'm going to go over the top with some white. Let the white dry, and then tint that white down. Now I'm just kind of hooking these up, these lines, pulling them up, look at the direction they all go in, and pull a few round now and through the wash of colour we've already got on there. Now they actually start working their way around that direction now, don't they? With this, you can really play with this as long as you want, as much as you want, to add even more layers of detail and contrast. Okay, but for demonstration purposes, this will give us some general idea on how to paint a very bright coloured and lively looking eye. Now, how would you like to learn about painting different animals' eyes in watercolour? See what I'll do? I'll pop a little link to the top right hand corner for you. I'll see you there.